The stars had always seemed distant jewels to I HFY, but the day they were stolen was the day his life split apart. He awoke in the glass cages of the Sicrathi, an insectile species whose empire stretched across sectors of the void. Around him, humans were strapped to crystalline pods, their life force siphoned through humming conduits that fed into the throats of colossal warships. The Sicrathi did not burn fuel or matter, they burned people. The energy of flesh, soul, and heartbeat became the pulse that drove their engines across galaxies. Elias pressed his palms against the glass, rage burning. But the siphon tubes latched to his veins, silenced every cry with exhaustion. He knew, in that moment, he was no passenger. He was fuel. When the siphon surged, Elias felt agony flood his bones, like his blood was being sung into the wires. Around him, others slumped into silence, drained to husks within weeks. Yet Elias endured. Something in his body resisted the full drain, as though some spark in him refused to yield. The Sicrathi noticed. Instead of discarding him, they transferred him deeper into the engine chamber, where prisoners with unusual resilience were fed more heavily into the cores. He watched through flickering vision as alien technicians harvested lives, tossing out the remains as charred dust. Each heartbeat stolen from him lit starship conduits like veins of fire, and still he whispered to himself, "Not me, not forever." The chamber was alive with horror. Thousands of pods were arranged in rings, each linked to pulsing conduits that led into the titanic vessel's engine. Elias studied the flow with the mind of a mechanic, remembering the machines he once built on Earth. He noticed how the siphon nodes overloaded if too much life force pushed back. He began timing his breaths, forcing his body to resist the drain. In surges, small enough not to be noticed but strong enough to ripple the conduits. Sparks danced across wires. Technicians muttered. His spark had been found. He smiled weakly even as pain scalded him. If humans were fuel, then fuel could become fire, and fire could burn engines apart. Weeks blurred. The Sicrathi grew restless at his anomalies, but their arrogance blinded them to danger. They assumed he was simply a rare, high-yield source. Elias endured until the day an alien overseer dragged a new prisoner into the chamber. It was a woman with silver tattoos winding across her arms, glowing faintly like circuitry. Her name, whispered when she awoke, was Saris Kyle. She was not human. Her world had fallen before the Sicrathi centuries ago, and her people had been enslaved as conductors, those whose bodies amplified stolen energies. When their eyes met, Elias saw in her a mirror, a spark waiting for fuel. Saris leaned weakly against her pod, whispering across the hum of conduits, "You burn differently. I can feel it." At first, Elias didn't trust her. Too many whispered. Promises had led to dead ends. But Saris proved her words by subtly bending her pod's aura, directing siphoned energy toward Elias instead of into the conduits. The rush seared his body, filling him with strength instead of emptiness. For the first time, Elias felt power flow back. "Together," Saris mouthed, and he nodded through the glass. In secret moments, they began weaving resistance, she amplifying, he channeling. The conduits flickered with irregular pulses, unnoticed by arrogant overseers, until the day they would burst. What the Sicrathi thought was control was, in truth, two prisoners shaping fire in their veins. Escape came in fire. During a transit across the desert system of Turiel, Elias inhaled deeply, drawing energy into his lungs as though the siphon were no longer theft but fuel for him. Saris amplified the surge, her tattoos blazing like constellations. The conduits cracked, glass pods shattered. Alarms howled through the chamber as power rippled backward, igniting the warship's veins. Prisoners stirred from their stupor, life force suddenly free. Elias tore himself from his pod, skin glowing with unspent energy, fists trembling with rage. The ship lurched violently, one engine core collapsing into molten slag. For the first time, Sicrathi war tech felt fear of its own fuel. They fought their way through chaos, Elias stumbling with raw power, Ceres guiding him with steady eyes. Alien guards tried to intercept, but conduits burst under Elias's strikes, arcs of stolen lightning searing insectile limbs. Ceres bent magnetic locks aside with gestures of her glowing hands, freeing prisoners as they ran. 1,000 weak voices began to rise into something fierce, the murmur of rebellion. In the hangar, they found scavenged ships. Broken relics meant for spare parts. Elias grinned through bloodied teeth. Then we build. And with Ceres's guidance, they bound engines to stolen cores. Human spark fused with alien conductor's song. The first ship roared awake like a dragon breathing. The survivors fled into the dunes of Turiel below, the colossal Sicrathi warship collapsing into flame behind them. For days they wandered the sands, pursued by drones, hunted as fugitives. Yet Elias carried the fire still, his veins still charged from the siphon's backlash. At night, Ceres drew patterns in the sand, teaching him her people's way of weaving power into symbols. He matched her strokes with human improvisation, diagrams that had never existed before. Together, they wrote a language of rebellion in sand and starlight. "We will not just run," Ceres told him, her voice fierce as the desert wind. "We will make them fear their engines. We will become the spark in every vein they built." The survivors built a camp among the dunes, ships camouflaged, pods repurposed into shelters. Elias rose as reluctant leader, though he never sought the title. The people followed him because he carried fire in his hands. But he knew the true strength was Ceres. Her presence steadied him, her strange resonance amplifying his defiance into something unbreakable. Each day they trained, humans and alien captives alike, learning to resist the siphons, learning to turn weakness into reaction. The desert became a forge, shaping them into weapons not of war alone, but of survival. When scouts returned with news of another warship approaching, Elias simply clenched his fists. Then we burn brighter. The second battle was not like the first. The Sicrathi came prepared, engines reinforced, guards doubled. But Elias and Ceres had prepared too. The survivors boarded scavenged craft, slipping into the skies like sparks caught in wind. Ceres's tattoos flared as she bent energy fields aside, Elias hurling blasts that ruptured conduits mid-flight. The warship staggered, power lines faltering as enslaved prisoners inside began to stir with resistance of their own. Elias's heart pounded with fury and hope alike. "Every engine burns fuel," he shouted across comms. "Let's remind them fuel fights back." And as fire tore across the desert sky, the survivors knew they were not prey anymore. They were fire unleashed. Victory tasted of smoke and grief. Many fell, their bodies broken, their sparks spent in the fight. Elias buried the dead beneath, cairns of crystal sand, hands trembling as he whispered promises to never let their sacrifice be stolen in vain. Ceres stood beside him, eyes hollow but blazing with determination. "This is only the beginning," she said. "The Sicrathi will come with more. We must become more too." Elias nodded, fire in his veins, steady but restless. They had struck, sparks. Now they needed to become a blaze. And so beneath the desert stars, the spark-born rebellion was named, its oath written not in ink, but in the fire of stolen lives. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread like wildfire across enslaved systems. Stories of humans who turned siphons into weapons, of a woman with glowing veins and a man with unbreakable fury, carried by smugglers and fugitives alike. The Sicrathi called them heretics. The oppressed called them hope. And though Elias knew, the fight was far from over. Each night, as Ceres's hand brushed his in the quiet firelight, he felt something bloom. It was not only rebellion, it was life, stubborn and radiant, refusing to be drained. He had once been fuel. Now he was fire, and fire was only beginning to rise. The rebellion's desert camp was no longer hidden. By the third week, Socrathi drones circled endlessly, scanning the dunes with cold precision. Elias knew they had little time. He stood in the glow of a campfire, tracing crude diagrams in the sand with Ceres beside him. They planned to take the fight outward, to strike before the enemy swallowed them again. But their weapons were salvaged scraps, their ships patched with desperation. Still, Ceres's silver tattoos glowed brighter each night, syncing with Elias's pulse when they stood too close. "We don't need fleets," she whispered. "We just need sparks in the right place." Her faith, steady as a star, anchored his resolve. They struck first at supply lines. Skimming through dunes at dawn, their scavenged craft swarmed the Socrathi haulers. The insectile overlords never expected humans to fight with precision, to fight with fire instead of fear. Elias hurled arcs of stolen energy into conduits, disabling their engines before guards even raised their weapons. Ceres bent shields aside with her resonant hum, guiding the survivors like a conductor leading an orchestra. When the battle ended, they had won not just fuel and metal, but prisoners, scores of humans dragged from siphon pods. Their camp swelled, with faces wide-eyed with disbelief, whispering, "We were fuel. Now we are free." For Elias, it was the sweetest victory yet, but victory drew attention. Within days, a Socrathi dreadship appeared above Turiel, its shadow blotting out the horizon. It descended like a leviathan of iron and hunger, its belly filled with pods and siphons, ready to reclaim their fuel. Panic rippled through the camp. Some urged retreat into deeper deserts, others begged surrender to spare their children. Elias stood upon a dune, voice cutting through fear. "If we run now, we'll be hunted until the sands swallow us. If we fight, we burn together, and fire spreads." His words caught, carried by the desert wind. Even Ceres's steady hand trembled, though her eyes blazed with agreement. The dreadship had come. The spark would answer. The battle was chaos incarnate. The dreadship opened its maw, pouring out swarms of Socrathi soldiers, their chitin shining, under twin suns. The survivors met them with salvaged rifles, with stolen lightning, with fury unchained. Elias led from the front, his body glowing with fire siphoned and repurposed. Ceres walked beside him, her tattoos weaving shields around those too weak to stand. Prisoners inside the dreadship began to stir, inspired by rumors of the Sparkborn. Through comms, Elias shouted words into their despair. "Fight back! Your lives are engines! Burn them against the ones who enslave you!" The ship convulsed as prisoners resisted, conduits faltering. And in that falter, the Sparkborn surged. Hours. Later, the desert was a graveyard of metal and chitin. The dreadship lay cracked, its engines dead, its siphon chambers torn apart by the very fuel it sought. Survivors walked among wreckage, wounded but alive, free where none had expected freedom. Elias collapsed onto a dune, Ceres kneeling beside him, pressing her glowing hand to his chest. "You burn yourself too hot," she whispered, eyes filled with both anger and fear. He laughed weakly, coughing smoke. "What's fire for if not to burn?" Her silence was heavy, but her hand never left his. In the aftermath, whispers spread further. The Sparkborn had slain a dreadship. Hope was no longer rumor. It was fact. Yet hope invited danger. Across the stars, Socrathi fleets turned their gaze upon Turiel. Spies brought word. Entire armadas stirred, engines screaming for vengeance. Elias gathered his people in the cracked hull of the dreadship they had destroyed, now a makeshift council hall. "We can't stay here," he told them, voice hoarse but firm. If we wait, they'll crush us beneath fleets. We take the fight to them. We burn their ships from inside. Murmurs rose. Fear, doubt, desperate yearning. Saris's voice cut through it all, her tone a song of iron. You know what they fear most. Not your fire, not my resonance. They fear us united. That is how we win. So the Sparkborn left the desert. They built ships from scavenged bones, patchwork crafts powered by siphon cores reversed against their makers. They slipped into the stars like embers on the wind, striking quickly at isolated ships, freeing captives, igniting uprisings. Elias grew into his role unwillingly, commander by need, hero by others' belief. Saris stood always at his side, her presence both weapon and solace. With every battle, her aura amplified his fire, and his fire steadied her will. They became more than symbols. They became myth. Across colonies, murals of a human burning bright beside a silver-lit alien began to appear. Myths were fuel too, and the Sparkborn fed them well, but power demanded sacrifice. In their seventh strike, against a Sikrathi engine ship the size of a city, Elias felt his fire falter. The siphon cores within were too vast, too hungry, their pull threatening to tear his life away completely. He staggered in the chamber, vision darkening as Saris caught him with glowing arms. "Don't!" she begged. "Don't burn it all at once!" His voice was a rasp, a smile still curling his lips. "Engines only run if we let them. Time to starve them." Together they surged, her resonance amplifying his spark into a blaze that ruptured conduits in waves. The ship shuddered, engines collapsing in on themselves. They barely escaped alive, bodies scorched but spirits unbroken. That night, in the silence of deep space, Saris confronted him. "You'll kill yourself if you keep burning this way," she said, voice low, tattoos dim with worry. Elias stared out at the stars, hands trembling. "If I die, but we free them all. Worth it." Her anger flared, sharp as lightning. "You are not fuel either, Elias Vey. You are fire, but fire needs to last." She pressed her forehead to his, eyes shimmering. "Promise me you'll live long enough to see victory." For the first time, he had no answer. But in her gaze he saw the truth. Fire burned brightest, not when it consumed, but when it endured. The next campaign proved her words prophetic. At the edge of the Dral Nebula, the Sparkborn launched a desperate strike on a shipyard churning, out siphon pods by the thousands. The Sikrathi fought with ferocity, determined to choke the rebellion before it spread further. Elias led with restraint this time, pacing his fire, guiding others to burn instead of burning himself away. Saris stood in the center of the chaos, weaving her resonance into a shield that spanned ships, her body glowing like a living constellation. When the shipyard finally fell, when the last pod was smashed and captives poured into freedom, Elias understood. The Sparkborn were no longer embers. They were wildfire, and wildfire was unstoppable. The fall of the Dral shipyard sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the Sikrathi Empire trembled. They had always seen humanity and their other enslaved species as nothing more than engines to consume, but now their war councils whispered of the Sparkborn as if speaking of a plague. Rumors of humans burning ships from within reached even the distant colonies, and with each rumor came uprisings. Entire pods of prisoners rose up mid-drain, channels reversed by whispers of Elias Vey and Saris Kyle. Fear spread like frost across the Empire's iron veins, but fear was never enough to stop a beast that fed on lives. The Sikrathi prepared. Their greatest weapon, the great war ark Veracis Eternal, emerged from the void like a wound in space itself. It was no ship but a fortress, powered by millions of siphon pods arranged in rings so vast they glowed like false suns. The Cycrathi gathered their most loyal fleets around it, determined to erase the Sparkborn once and for all. Elias stood on the bridge of the scavenged flagship Ashwaker, staring at the War Ark's colossal silhouette across the nebula. Around him, survivors whispered prayers and curses. Saris placed a hand on his shoulder, silver tattoos pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "This is where sparks either fade," she murmured, "or become the fire that remakes the void." Elias clenched his fists. "Then we burn it all." The Sparkborn fleet, ragtag, patched, half-broken, moved like embers scattered in a storm. They darted into the fringes of the War Ark's defenses, harassing, stinging, cutting where they could. Elias knew they could not match its strength directly. Their only chance lay inside its veins. A boarding strike was prepared, Elias at its head, Saris at his side, and dozens of volunteers who knew death was likely. As they breached the outer hull, the scale of horror struck them. Rows upon rows of siphon pods lined cavernous chambers, each filled with screaming captives whose essence was being drained in unison. The sight hardened Elias's fury until it was unbearable fire. "Not one more soul," he growled, and the assault began. The Cycrathi fought with desperation, their insectile forms swarming across gantries and conduits. But Elias's fire burned through them, arcs of energy searing their chitinous armor. Every strike fueled not by hate but by the lives he swore to save. Saris amplified him, her resonance weaving shields over the strike teams, deflecting blasts that would have ended them. Together, they carved a path deeper into the core, prisoners stirring at the sight of rebellion incarnate. "Rise," Elias shouted, voice carried through intercoms hacked by Sparkborn. "Your lives are not fuel, they are fire! Burn with us!" And like a tide, captives broke free, overwhelming guards, their sparks ignited by his words. But the core chamber itself was a nightmare. The heart of the War Ark throbbed like a living wound, conduits thick with siphoned essence converging into a singular crystalline engine. Its glow was unbearable, fueled by millions, each heartbeat, stolen becoming raw power. Elias staggered at the sight, his body almost buckling under the sheer pull of the siphon's hunger. "It wants everything," he rasped, sweat streaming, fire inside him flaring wildly. Saris caught him, her tattoos blazing brighter than ever, her voice like steel. "Then give it everything, but on our terms." Together they pressed their hands to the conduits, reversing the flow, channeling the stolen lives not into the engine, but into resistance. The War Ark screamed. The ship convulsed violently as siphons ruptured across its decks. Flames tore through conduits, explosions rocking the hull. Cycrathi technicians screeched as their masterpiece began to cannibalize itself. Elias roared, his body burning with raw energy, vision a blur of light and pain. Saris's voice anchored him, her resonance keeping him from being consumed. "Hold, Elias! You are not fuel! You are the spark!" Prisoners all across the War Ark began resisting, pushing their essence back into the system. The engine faltered, overfed and uncontrolled. The Veraces Eternal, their god machine, was dying by the very fuel it sought to devour. The Sparkborn had turned its hunger into its undoing. But the cost was crushing. Elias collapsed as fire scorched his veins, his body trembling at the brink of burning out completely. Saris held him in the ruins of the core, her tears glowing, silver as they fell on his skin. Around them, survivors rallied, dragging him from the collapsing chamber. Explosions tore through the War Ark as entire decks broke apart. The Sparkborn fled through broken corridors, chased by the howls of dying engines. As they launched back into their ships, the War Ark split into fragments, scattering like a dying sun across the nebula. The greatest weapon of the Cycrathi was gone, and with its fall, the Empire trembled as never before. The galaxy erupted in uprisings. Across enslaved worlds, siphon pods were shattered, overseers slaughtered, chains torn apart by hands that remembered freedom. The Socrathi fleets fractured, their commanders bickering, panicked, desperate to maintain order. But the Sparkborn were already legend. Murals spread faster than fleets, stories of Elias and Ceres whispered like gospel, their images carved into ruins and painted across ships. "Fuel no longer," the freed declared. "We are fire," and every fire lit another. The rebellion had become revolution. The Socrathi could not extinguish it because fire burned in every captive they had ever drained. It was no longer Elias's fire alone, it was everyone's. Yet in the quiet after victory, Elias lay broken. His body, scarred by countless burns, trembled even in sleep. Ceres kept vigil beside him, her tattoos dim with exhaustion but her spirit unyielding. When he finally opened his eyes, weak but alive, she whispered, "You promised nothing, I HFY, and yet you lived." His cracked lips curved into a faint smile. "Guess fire's stubborn." She laughed, the sound soft and fierce all at once, pressing her forehead to his. In that moment, amid the wreckage of war, they found something more than survival. They found life, fragile and radiant, carved from the ashes of empire. The Sparkborn spread into the stars, no longer hunted prey but free peoples forging a new age. Some called Elias their savior, but he denied the title, pointing always to the people who rose beside him, to Ceres, whose resonance amplified hope itself. "I was never the fire," he told them quietly. "I was only the spark. You are the blaze." And as humanity and countless others rebuilt from centuries of chains, the galaxy carried forward a lesson etched into every liberated world. Fuel can burn, but fire transforms. The Socrathi had once thought they ruled forever. But they forgot one truth: fire never belongs to those who would cage it.